Okay. So does someone want to go first, or should I pick names? Ellison, you unmuted. Is that a
Oh,
volunteer?
Joyce.
Or is it accident?
I thought it was a unfortunate timing, but I figured
It's an unfortunate timing.
it
You
would
don't
be
have to go first, but you can.
sure, I can try. I was forming a few thoughts, but um I think where I start from right now with publications when I think about them is not that these are not overlapping reasons to write them, but I do separate in my head whether there's a um, something truly new. It not new like original, but new like the perspective that's added. The main value is that that perspective being added or that result being added contributes to a conversation that I'm aware of that's going on right now, and it would be timely. That kind of speaks to the quote I think you put, or your comment about the quote that had to do with the timing. So when I think about research contribution, a lot of what's on my mind there is, well, is this good timing or did we come kind of late to this conversation and what we have to contribute isn't necessarily on that research front. I think the other piece where I see papers still holding a lot of value for me is that they represent bringing something to completion that I appreciate for the accountability as a more in the PI or co-PI or mentor role, but I think is the important thing to communicate with and through trainees. So I think sometimes things can be worth writing about because it represents a finality, even if what isn't really being spoken to is a deeply enduring research contribution. Doesn't mean I'm not trying to say those are two totally separate things, but I think I'm currently drawing more these days from thinking about what does it represent to the person who's invested a lot of work, like a master's student or a trainee, to bring this to completion and see that investment. Um, those are two areas, and then the third that I just want to mention is like sometimes I think it's worth publishing something so that it can be used with a partner that doesn't typically read papers but would value the credibility that comes with them, like our work on a project with John Volkins right now with the Environmental Defense Fund. They certainly can read papers, but reading scientific literature isn't like their daily reading diet. But they really value a paper that underpins the motivation and rationale for whatever work they're trying to press forward. And I could see that having value here in this project, that there are partners that would really value a publication, even if it's not the top, I don't know, like their regular reading diet. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
No, certainly people like to have a backup to the things that they want to say. They might actually never read that paper, but they say, see?
Right,
And
right.
maybe nobody reads the paper, but they all say, see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Erica, you want to share your thoughts? Ellison's were um, quite general about the contributions of papers, but so you can be either general or specific or both.
Yeah. So I guess a couple things that come to my mind is I tend to want to write papers when they're more like quantitatively results driven. And from like this, like where my team is at in this project, we haven't really generated anything that's quantitative. And so I always struggle with thinking like, what is a paper that we can write that's more, of the discussion base, and maybe it's just because I don't find those super exciting to write, so I don't think in depth about that. But you know, as an audience person, I do enjoy some of those. It's just not my writing maybe style. And so maybe that's why I haven't necessarily pulled on, you know, putting some of this work into a paper yet. But that being said, I have found a lot of value when I am like early on, maybe just done some pilot testing and present at a conference like the Human Factors Ergonomic Society conference is a good example where we could, you know, think about putting some of the human behavior aspect or the applied, I can never remember what it stands for, but the applied human factors conference basically. And both of those have proceedings tracks, so there's like a tractable output from it. But yeah, I mean, those have been beneficial and like, hey, we did some pilot studies with 10 people. Here's what we're thinking about, like what are we missing or spur other people. I know I have a couple of grants specifically that I've gotten from just conversations from other researchers at poster sessions at Human Factors, and I'm like, that's a good idea. I could build on that, right? So
Mhm.
maybe not losing sight that like, yeah, we might not have substantial from the behavior team's standpoint, substantial quantitative results, but I think we could at least have conversations that would either help us define the next steps or other people do some spin-off work that would provide value to the field.
Yeah, so Erica, I want to probe that a little bit. And I think of the people here, you're the one whose field I know the least about, and so this is a good thing because it comes up for me with other people whose fields I do not know. I don't know what is considered a contribution by them, right? I know that we need you because I don't know how to think about that stuff. That's different from you seeing something as a contribution to your field. And for me, that happens a lot where I'm like, this field has never thought about it in this way. And they're all like, yeah, I mean, this is trivial, or I do this all the time. And so, given that we needed you, what do we need to say, right? Is it possibly that the placement of a discussion about your work is also um more in the environment space where this does not appear a lot? I'm not sure about, but I feel like we weren't doing this for nothing. It's filling a gap. So how do we identify that gap and make that available, make that information available to others?
Yeah, and I mean, when I go to human factors conferences that are not specific to transportation, right? So I'd say I aim for either like transportation specific stuff or human factors specific stuff. When I go to human factors conferences, I can't think of any time where anyone's been talking about air quality in the context of what we're doing. And so I don't think that the people that are modeling human behavior and thinking about, you know, the human factors engineering are thinking about this opportunity space of like in-home air quality interventions. And so I think there's like a very foundational level introduction there. And like we see all of these consumer products, right, that you can buy, you know, home air portable filters, et cetera, whatnot, or air quality sensors. But I don't see anyone in the human factors community necessarily like thinking about, well, what do the humans actually want to see and what actually motivates their behavior. So I think, yeah, the contribution of, hey, let's get more human factors people thinking about this and working on some of those end consumer products would really move the field a lot, right? I always think about like engineering the technology for, and I just talked about this in a previous meeting a couple minutes ago, right? We always design things for the perfect user that's like a fictionalized user that doesn't exist. And so we need to think about how people actually are using these systems and motivate them to use them. And the people that are really good at that, myself excluded, there's people that are much better, aren't necessarily working in that space in this like context.
Yeah, so I just wonder about bringing that human factor side to air quality and bringing air quality to the human factor side. Because I think some of the reason that there hasn't been a lot of quantitative information brought forward from your side is that like we're doing a lot of groundbreaking, right? And so it's like, crap, this doesn't work, or not really sure what, and um and I find that work to be, it just takes longer, right? It takes longer because there's not a base to build on. There's not somebody saying, here's the theory of how this works. Um, a- and so I wonder, maybe this is not a question to answer this minute, but how would you contemplate placing a communication in those intermediate spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have anything off the top of my head that's more unique than going to these conferences that are more human factor centered and bringing this topic area to light. Like for example, the surface transportation is very saturated at the human factors conferences. They're usually like it's like human factors or healthcare is, or sorry, it's transportation or healthcare that's usually at these human factors conferences. And healthcare meaning like, hospital systems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like I have been to hundreds of the exact same presentation about how to design the in-vehicle interface so that people aren't taking their eyes off the road too long, right? Like that's a completely saturated field, but people are still finding slightly nuanced ways to analyze that. What people aren't doing is the analogous to that of these like in-home interfaces, perhaps, right? We're just like hoping Google and whoever is manufacturing these are like thinking about that, but I don't know if they necessarily are. And not from an academic perspective to build on it and make it more generalized knowledge.
Yeah, but so I can imagine some, like for example, Pi, I don't know if he's got bandwidth, but um he's in health, his other job is healthcare or something, right? Or
He works at Google
he works at Google. Okay.
in the
But
automotive.
I thought you didn't want to do healthcare.
He-
Okay, I'm gonna start speculating what Pi does. But something like it doesn't even have to be very radical, but it would be a huge step. Like, what does what do vehicle human factors teach us about in-home interface communication? So just a thought there. Paul, I'm gonna go to you while Erica's musing.
Yeah, so I think I've got a fairly clear idea of what kind of product based on what we've done so far would be reasonable. And, it's a lot based on what MISA has done. Um, I think that, a little
Can
bit
you,
of the,
which, exactly which bits, and then you
I
can
am
go.
getting to that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Um, I think we certainly like all of the different things he's done in terms of the flow and filter testing could be mentioned, but I think the parts that are probably most interesting and relevant to try to kind of advance the discussion would be one, the results of the filter testing when we were actually using the smoke, because that is, it's of course no surprise that HEPA filters do better than MERV 13 filters at removing stuff. But at the particle size that the smoke is, I think that that would be a particularly interesting part. And then combining that, the part that he did where he combine, you know, let's say you can't pressurize fully. So some of the air is coming in through the
Mm,
envelope, some of the air is coming in through the system. What's the balance? Is it worth doing? How much, is even MERV 13, would doing it with MERV 13 be better than just letting infiltration drive stuff through the envelope because the envelope has some effective MERV rating. So kind of that comparison of the system without the system, or the system that can't fully pressurize, and how much value do you get, and how that scales with the infiltration rate, which would bring in some of the science of stack effect as well. Say that the infiltration rate in a home is not constant. But I think that those things that end up at the end showing MERV 13 doesn't get you very much. HEPA is necessary, but once you're using HEPA, even if you can't fully compensate, I mean, even if you can't fully pressurize the home, it's still worth doing. I feel like that would be a contribution to the discussion that people would find interesting.
So, the filter work and then the partial pressure or not fully pressurized and then not MERV, do you think that's all the same paper? Because it sounded like it covered a really lot of ground. I'm not trying to proliferate papers because I feel like people do that too much, but I also find it hard to read a paper that covers so much ground that you don't really know what it's about. And I've been
Depends on.
accused of that myself.
So the way I think about it, it is just one paper, but it really depends on how much we would need to, say, write a paper just about the wood smoke testing that involves all the details about how smoke was generated, how it was injected. I mean, are you writing, if you have 7,500 words, are you having to write 4,000 just to get to where you've given an introduction and the methods? If that is the level of detail we're getting into, then of how we even did that testing, then it probably is two. One on the smoke, using smoke for filtration, and the other for now, once we've got those numbers, what does it mean when you're doing a partially pressurized home? My preference would be to say, hey, we generated smoke. We made smoke from burning wood and we captured it and we injected into the system, and start from where we already have the smoke, in which case I think it's a single paper.
So I think you, well, there's like two separate issues there, right? One is what's your word count, and one is, well, like, what's the topical focus of the paper?
Yeah, and so when I think of the topical focus of the paper, it's more about what filtration level is needed, and what how much do you have to fully pressurize the home. And then the wood smoke part is just informing what percentage you get when you're using MERV 13, that goes into that other analysis of, do you get enough benefit from partial pressurization or just from MERV 13?
So you think that a single paper would be something like, here are all these considerations and then here's what we know about them.
Right. Here's stack effect. Here's what we assume about the filtration level of an envelope, building envelope.
Right.
And then from our smoke testing, we found that MERV 13 can get this fraction. And now with that, let's do an analysis of the value of a partially pressurized home.
Right,
When
sure.
you have HEPA versus MERV 13.
Sure, okay. And yeah, that sounds straightforward. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because I should have pulled up Christian's email, because I wanted to compare like what you had done with what Christian is saying they're working on. Are you and Christian working on those papers together that he mentioned, or did you receive that email? I'm sorry, I can't find it right now.
I don't even remember receiving an email about that, and he and I certainly have not talked about co-working on any papers.
Okay, he may have only responded to me because I said, if you can't be there. Sorry, I'm doing all this on my phone because of my silly computer. So I'm not. Oh, no, he just said to me, Okay, no, it doesn't sound like it's an overlap. A techno-economic analysis of run parameters versus diverted exposure, and one on benefits of initiation of infiltration. And he said, we are, I'm not sure who we was.
We is not me.
Okay. But that might be a good thing to raise in the tech team, right? Like it, because I feel like a lot of these things overlap. A lot of them are systemic questions. The ones that you raised are systemic questions. And so it might be good to coalesce the tech team around what they want to present. I guess what I find is that I'm not good at writing papers very quickly. And so I just try to write the ones that are really important and, as Ellison said, fulfill some goals like contributing to a conversation.
Yeah, and I had thought a long time ago, maybe we should start writing a paper just on all the results that MISA had, but I didn't think they're actually they were only interesting at the level of, hey, we did something, let's report what it was, as opposed to
Yeah,
moving any needle or any conversation.
right.
It really wasn't until much later that I felt like the body of work had gotten to where it could be a contribution to a conversation. And I agree. I already don't write a lot of papers, and I certainly don't want to write throwaway ones just to say we got something out.
Um, yeah, and I'm sorry, guys, I'm having total failure manipulating my phone. So I'm trying to manage this all at the same time. I'm listening. Okay, I think I got the Zoom back. Okay, but it sounds like there needs to be a larger tech team discussion around papers. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't get MISA to move forward with that, but it seems like there's some of these systemic considerations that would be worthwhile to bring forward. Ellison, I liked your framing, the conversation, like contributing to a conversation, achieving completion, and then some things for credibility. Or some like putting a stake in the ground to maintain credibility. I also like to have a reason. I find it very tedious to write a paper that's like, well, we did it and here it is. Without seeing where it goes. There's so many papers that I feel like it's very difficult for audiences to absorb all of them. Unless you're actually providing some additional value. So I've been working with Danny on a paper, and I think that what I've wanted to communicate is now that we have real-time pressure differences in a home, we can make some kind of estimate of how much stack and wind contribute in real time and over time. And so that's what we've been working on. I think there's more to do using the pressures to forecast or to estimate infiltration, but that's my next immediate one is what do we learn from the pressures about what the flows would be? And I personally tend to work on a project thinking like not what are all the papers I need to write, which can feel intimidating, but what is the next paper that's the highest value that needs to go out from my work. So Danny and Will, I wanted to give you a chance to comment. Whitney, you may comment if you wish, but I had assumed that this wasn't really your thing, and so if it is, you are free to jump in. But
just listening and I'm good.
okay. Yeah, Will, you want to say something and then Danny?
Sure. Can you say the questions again?
There's not a question. The question is what do we need to or what do we need to bring forward from this project and how do we bring it forward? And sometimes the answer is a paper and sometimes the answer is something else.
Okay. I guess I don't have much to offer on the side of like papers, other than I would say my first instinct with the things that I've worked on since I've been here is, since it's interesting to me, I'm like, I feel like someone else might find this interesting and I want to share this information with somebody. I want them to know about it. Sometimes that could just be a conversation if somebody, especially when I talk to my classmates or my friends from grad school, working in public health, I like sharing the things that I'm doing because it is very different from what they're doing. I mean, I think of this all, of course, as someone in public health, like that's what I think about and the lens that I would like to share things for. So I don't know, like I said, I mean, I think my instincts just like share it. I don't know what the best way is. It could just be me blabbing to somebody who will give me time, or like talking about it at a conference. I've in very short spurts, I've been doing it at some of the events that I've been doing, whether it's for like work, or just because, you know, I'm like working an event and it comes up. And I think too, like about the paper thing, because I'm like, oh, we should share this, but I don't know. It's like, wait, has this already been shared too much? Too many people already talking about this, you know? And then, you know, when I'm thinking about this, like ASHRAE paper, which I don't know what's gonna happen with that, but the thing I'm working on with Ellison, we're looking at like the VOCs and that. It's like looking through that, and this is my first time really diving deeply into a lot of academic papers. I'm like, I feel like we should, because a lot of people in my mind, not that they didn't do it right, but there's a lot of information they left out. It's like, we will include this information. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'm inclined to share, like, because I think it will benefit a lot of people, learning these things about what we're doing, whether they're adjacent to like the work we're doing, or they're the base or the public we're trying to help, you know, with our overall efforts of this project.
Yeah. And I want to call something out that you said, like when you see what other people have done, then you react and you say, oh, they need to know this. And that's another thing that I'd like to put into the list that Ellison gave. Um, I I often perceive my work as too incomplete to share or something until I see what other people have done, and then I'm like, oh man, I really need. uh, there's some information that needs to get out there as information or correction, or I'm not really sure, but or context. Ellison had a lot of C's: conversation, completion, and credibility. So I would ask, add context and you know, sometimes correction of misconceptions or something. But then those are hard to place, right? Those are hard. It's hard to get the people who need to be corrected to like read your work and take it up. So then that's also an art. Danny, you want to say anything?
I don't know if I have a ton to add. Um, I think something interesting that I've observed is that just in talking to other people in the mechanical engineering cohort, of like once they start learning about this research, you start to see their gears turning in their head, and they're like, wait, this is actually really interesting. And there's kind of a lot of like, huh, really moments. And like there was like a graduate social thing last night, and at one point, there were like 4 engineers that were like, wait a minute, wait. You're telling me that temperature causes airflow into my house? I was like, yeah. And so, kind of in that vein of like, in thinking about how to kind of get this to like in front of the right eyes, into the right brains, like if there's any kind of other educational campaign we could wage, other than putting a paper out. Like if that's an educational video series talking about like how does your home function? What can you do to protect your home from poor air quality? Just like every day, like, you know, I'm a homeowner, I don't have anything special, what can I do? That could be something interesting, or even like if we could show up at a community meeting or something similar. That could be an interesting way to get to disseminate some of this information.
Mhm.
I know there are challenges. We've talked about all the challenges regarding that, but something that I've been thinking about over the past couple weeks.
I want to add something to like Danny, you kind of said in short words what I said in so many words was I don't care about getting information to other people in academia. I care about getting information out to people who I
Mm.
think could like learn like that public address type thing, like that like we have public like the more you know.
Mhm.
Like that's I feel like that's who I want to share information with because that's who we're doing this for. I mean, at least me, it's like, you know, I don't know.
Well, I really liked that framing of information stock and flow. And I feel like very often as researchers, we're told that we need to contribute to the stocks, but we don't talk about how it's going to flow or whether that flow is going to be useful. And I also think that it can be rather intimidating to think about all the things you ought to be doing. Yeah, we ought to be talking to policymakers and the community and it seems like there's probably 5 or 6 levels of people we should be communicating to, and it seems exhausting. So I like this idea of maybe picking one, like how does your home function? That's a thing that I've seen as missing, and I don't know if maybe we should just think about tackling that. We tried to do a little bit of that during the pandemic. You know, like what can you do or what's going on? But there was so much noise around that time that it did not really work very well. So I think one thing I'd like to call out is I feel like this group is a bunch of really thoughtful people and critical, and sometimes that leads to this like, oh, the world doesn't need another paper. I don't want to just write a paper just to write a paper. I appreciate that very much about the people that I work with, right? Some people are like, let's write 10 papers, none of which will be read. But we may err too much on the side of caution. And I encounter that, for example, when we interacted with what was their name? The Danny, the people you brought from the Iceland conference. I cannot
Blueprint.
remember. Yeah, Blueprint. Yeah, they were like, these people had a crap ton of money and they had no idea what they were doing, is my did you get a different impression, Paul?
Nope, nope,
And I'm
that's
like,
pretty much it.
and they're like, well, we just want to like tape things together and save everybody from anthrax attacks. And I'm like, well, you probably need a little more sophistication than that. Um and and so I feel like sharing not knowledge but wisdom, right, is something that we should be thinking about doing. I feel like we have a responsibility to share the knowledge we develop and the insights we develop. I personally find it very hard to share that kinds of things because it's so much easier to publish a paper that's like, I made some measurements and here's my average, than to say what you actually learned, which is the real purpose of research. I don't know how you all experience it. But I feel like we have a cool project. We have the luxury of being able to interact on a system. What should we be sharing? So I wrote down, you don't have to reiterate what you already said, because I wrote them all down. I'm going to come back to you and make you write those papers. But what should we be sharing? What do you see as a lack? Maybe Allison's framing of the conversation. What is timely?
I mean, eventually, I think we ought to be at conferences like HPC. You know, I do think that it is premature for where we're at, but next time it won't be premature. The project will be more or less done. We will have been in a bunch of houses. We'll have the results. If it worked, if what we did worked, we ought to be at HPC because those are the people who might actually do it.
Mm,
There's not an academic who'd ever read the paper who is likely to actually go into their basement and install this thing based on what we said. But
mhm.
the people at HPC could make use of it. The manufacturers could make use of it. That's where if we wanted to have impact, we should be going to places like that. Not only that necessarily, but places like that. No paper necessary. In fact, no paper even as an option.
Hey, Paul, I'm gonna task you with reminding the group in 2020 for HPC 2027, because that deadline feels very early to me and I always forget it. Anyone else? Who should we be, who needs to know? Who would benefit from sharing wisdom, not just knowledge?
I tagged wisdom and I don't know that this would be wise in any way. I had a thought though before. I'm gonna say this predates what you just said. um let's see, how do I think something that happens in um I'm gonna go broad first, which is like environmental health interventions, which really broadly can be often characterized by they're never the top on the list, and if they are, it's because of a crisis, or if they are, it's because of a crisis.
Mhm.
Like if I'm going to go back to your example, Erica. Like I don't know the field on like driving time, but like the consequence of not having your eyes on the road seems really high. So whether or not it should be saturated, I would not want to judge, but it sort of makes sense to me. Like there's a high value on getting more eyes on the road while we're relying on humans to drive on the road. And I really don't know the field, but that's like the other end. In work in the home, I think what I feel like happens a lot is like, here's a problem. Here's something else you could do about it. Here's something else you could do about it. Here's something else you could do about it. And none of the things were ever in your budget for time or money to begin with. And I think we're reluctant as academics to write about something like this is not suited for this condition. And I don't know that a
Huh.
paper should be leading with that. Like I could say that I'm like, that would be a bad idea because I don't think that would get published. But it's not quite the same as talking about publishing null findings, but I find it sort of resides in my mind in the same realm. Like, can we define informative negative space so that if going to HPC seems like a great idea, that's for people who would maybe use it and they'd already maybe, Paul, know, they'd look at it and they'd know the context in which it fits because they have the, expertise. But on the academic side, I've wondered if we could start communicating more about negative space. Like this whole home pressurization to me does not fit all cases, but it might fit some cases really well.
Mhm.
And that could be a conceptual piece, but it's probably better if it's grounded by like quantitative analyses that are already underway or that are planned.
Hmm.
So
So are you saying this generally, Allison, or are you saying this as part of a paper, or are you saying this
I
is like,
always think about it. I was trying to think less generally than I started out at the beginning of the conversation, more about this particular project. Like, under what conditions and contexts does whole home pressurization make sense to entertain? When might we think it would be successful, and under what conditions would it really not be successful?
Mhm.
Like, I think saying both might be what I'm trying to, well, I'm exploring in my mind. I don't actually know if that's valuable, but what
Mm.
I'm thinking about since you'd sent your email, so not that long, it's like, well, what does this project have to offer? Another solution for the same problem, which is outdoor pollution gets into homes. For
Mhm.
those reading about it, will it just sound like yet another thing that's a little too expensive, a little too hard, and a little too unwieldy to do? What if we put a little more into thinking about when is it, like, when are the barriers low to making this happen and making
Mhm.
this work? And can data that are being collected inform that? Uh, Somewhat not that well baked of an idea, but
So one thing that I hear is that um yeah, you're kind of contrasting the way people do things now, which is like, look, many ideas, right? Like
yes,
stuff you should think about, and
uh,
there's nothing telling you what not
yes,
what you can be forgiven for not thinking about.
yes,
And
yeah,
so even like a step forward in that with regard to the pressurization system would be something like, this is most suited for these applications and less suited for these other applications.
yeah. And I'm saying a contribution is the and not suited for these, like, if
Right,
we can
right.
say it. I'm not saying to say it just to say it, but if we could say it, like the plus and the minus, or the Boolean
Mhm.
logic of like yes and no.
Right. And I think the same might be true of some of the things that Christian sent to me, which he
Mm,
didn't send to the whole group. One of them was, when what's the benefit of
mhm,
anticipatory action? When is there
mhm.
no benefit? And I
Yeah,
think, or when is there not enough benefit to make it worth it?
yeah,
So I think, yeah, let's bring that back to the tech team. I mean, I think it's a bigger idea, but I also like to look for places to start. Where would you start doing something that is different like that? So there's some small things that, so for example, Ellison, you brought up the idea of the screening of the homes with a 3 to 5 day measurement.
mhm.
And I think that just, seemed like it came out of your experience measuring other things. Um, but I find that tremendously valuable, right? Like the way that you just pulled out, like, well, not all the homes are going to work. Maybe we should screen them first. And it's that kind of wisdom that I'm referring to as we develop skill and experience. We often don't see um, that we some of the evolution has been an understanding of better ways to do things that are only incidentally communicated. Right. And sometimes you will only know that you know them when somebody proposes something that you've already tried. And you're like, oh, wait, yeah, you're not going to want to do that. And then usually they don't listen. Right. But so maybe this is like a similar to your negative space, is like, what if we learned to be sort of best practices, not because they're best practices, but because there's a substantial amount of negative space around, right? There's some stuff that's just the plain not fruitful.
Mhm.
And Erica, I feel like our whole experience with the surveys has been like, all that stuff we learn, and then we're gonna publish a, God hope, maybe we are gonna publish a thing that says, here's our 300 surveys. And then not published is, you really have to do them this way.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Like
Yeah.
similar to the negative, people don't publish negative findings.
Yeah, you don't publish all your failed methodologies of what
Uh-huh.
didn't work.
Yeah.
We did have one, I can point to one success Adam and I published on a totally failed effort to do a push to web approach for surveys, and we managed to get it published, and it was the hardest paper to get published, and like it took 4 rounds of revision. But it was so worth it because we were able to say the literature said this would be more successful. We tried 2 ways, and the thing that the literature said would be more successful completely flopped. And it doesn't mean that the literature was wrong, but like we tried it, and here's why we think it flopped. And it was fulfilling to write it because it was very grounded in what we had done. It wasn't just an opinion that we had about it. Oh, it kind of failed because we tried a few times. No, we tried like full force.
Yeah, so I don't have any particular answers on this, and it sounds like there's enough potential papers for each sub-team to write next. I don't know if we handed you one, Will, but I think that the danger is we could identify things to write next, and yet we're not, some of the greatest value is in the wisdom that comes forward, especially when you try to put things together as we have in this work. So it's not like I have an answer for that.
I want to draw a little attention to the thing I put in the chat, this
Oh,
conference,
Oh.
the link to a conference. So this is a conference that's being put on by the main person behind it is a woman named Carla Walker Miller, who runs a big utility program implementer company. Carla serves on the board of BPA with me for another week until I roll off. It is specifically to mobilize resources, partnerships, and education to ensure that Black, Brown, Latinx, Indigenous, and other communities of color are at the forefront of the energy transition. The keynote speaker is Stacey Abrams.
well,
That's
I
cool.
would love to go. It's October 13 to 15. Which, given everything, all the other travel I'm doing, I just cannot make the case for it. But I'd really love to go. But that's the kind of conference also, they're interested in clean energy. They're representing communities that tend to be disproportionately disadvantaged by the kinds of things that our technology could help with. And so I think it's another case different from HPC, that's a bunch of practitioners. Would be going and talking to people who could potentially most benefit from it, and at the kind of ground level, and potentially get allies and partners who would see this as something that could really help their communities. So it's another approach to getting it out there to the people who would be really using it.
so I also like to, so this is a thing you're apparently not supposed to do because you're supposed to go present. I like to go to conferences where I'm not presenting anything, and because I don't feel like I'm up to speed yet. I want to hear what's important to them. So a conference like that, I would just go and say, what do you guys need? Like, what's important to you? Do you care about the technology, or is it more, is it more about workplace concerns, or what, like there might be a thing that we are not, there might be many things that we are just totally not present to.
I agree completely. And like I say, I would love to go to this conference, not to present, but just to be there and talk to people and hear from people. Maybe there would be an interest in presenting at some point at a conference like this, but the number one thing would be to be there with them. And have opportunities. I mean, maybe they are interested and you talk about it at the bar.
Right.
You don't have to have a presentation for it. I wish the timing was different.
Yeah. So that's another thing for folks to think about is where would you go? Erica, you've mentioned that you find some topics to be saturated. I feel the same thing when I go to American Geophysical Union. I'm like, God, I do not need another session about aerosols and climate change. I mean, yes, I know it's important, but if you didn't make a major advance, just summarize it, send it to me in a tweet, and I'll be done, right? And yeah. So I talked about output here, but there's also input, and maybe that's something for everyone to reflect on. What kind of input would you want? What would you want to learn instead of give? I'll tell you, okay, my last thing, I'm signing up to go to the Self-Determination Theory Conference, which is next July. I'm not gonna present anything, I'm totally, or if I do, I'll put a poster. But I just want to see how people use it. So. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. Nice to see you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
On that
Matthew.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, I don't know how to turn it off.